I'm Carina Wyborn. I'm with the ANU. I think I said that already, so I probably don't need to say it again, but hi online people if you missed that before. So yeah, thanks very much to Jasper for doing the legwork of organising this session. We're going to talk a lot about transdisciplinarity now. There's multiple drivers of this kind of thrust towards transdisciplinarity that we see in earth systems governance research, sort of both the idea of the value of including different types of knowledge in the way in which we understand ESG type problems, but then also this sort of assumption that transdisciplinary research is one of the ways in which you can do research in an arena of making change. So there's sort of normative drivers towards this being a good way of doing research, but it's sort of pragmatically can sometimes be quite challenging. And so the sort of intent of our session today is just to have a little bit of a chat about everyone's experiences with doing transdisciplinary research. We've got a great panel of speakers today to talk on their different experiences. So we've asked them to give a short example of a transdisciplinary research project that they've been involved with. And then we're going to open up. We've got some questions that we have sort of prepared in advance, and then we wanted to have a conversation with everybody more broadly. So I'm just going to introduce our panel really briefly. So Chris on the end there is Professor of Sustainability Transformations and Associate Director of Learning at the Learning and Development, at ISF at UTS. So Chris is a sort of sociologist and political theorist and does a whole range of different work on thinking about the future and thinking about transformations towards sustainable futures. And then next we have Ehsan Nabavi. Did I say that right?
Yeah.
Wow. That'd be a first. He's a senior lecturer at the ANU Centre for the Public Awareness of Science. He's worn multiple hats in his life: civil engineer, sociologist, and now AI researcher. Does that mean you do AI, or you just study how other people do?
I used to do. Not anymore.
Not anymore.
I'm just criticizing people's
Nice. Ehsan has done lots of cool things and is widely published in a whole range of different types of journals. But I think probably most interestingly of his CV that I'm looking at here is he set up the ANU's Responsible Innovation Lab. So that's about all I'll say about Ehsan, because I could say more, but I won't. And then next we have Rebecca Riggs. Rebecca Riggs is a sustainability scientist at CSIRO's Agriculture and Food. So she's done a whole range of different work in transdisciplinary partnerships to leverage change. She uses value-centred approaches and visual tools to co-develop systems capabilities for sustainability transitions. Maybe she'll be able to explain to us what that all means. And joining us online from Indonesia, Mochamad Indrawan is a researcher with the Research Centre for Climate Change at the Universitas Indonesia, trained as an ecologist and a conservation biologist, but also has 3 decades of field experiences working with facilitating Indigenous peoples and local communities to establish community conservation areas. So that is our panel.
Yes.
And there we go. There's our 4th panel member. I can't even count. So Chris, I'm going to hand over to you to go first, please. And I will time you.
Sorry?
I will time you. Do you want to?
Okay,
Yep.
please do.
Please do. All right.
Wanting to wind it up.
That sounds good. All right, I'll go.
Because I'm at the Institute for Sustainable Futures, and we've been calling ourselves a transdisciplinary research institute since around 2002. We started using the term, so we've been claiming that space, and so there's a lot of examples I could talk about of varying degrees of actual transdisciplinarity over that time. The one I'll share today is the most recent one, I guess, which is a sense-making process coming out of the Transformations Conference last year. So I was the co-chair of the Sydney leg of the Transformations Conference 2023, and when we brought that conference together, one of the things we really wanted to do was have some sort of sense-making process at the conference itself. So there was some sort of new knowledge that emerged from the event. And the theme of the conference was transformative partnerships for a better world. So we really wanted to draw on the experience of all the delegates to the conference of what do you think it takes to form transformative partnerships? And obviously, a lot of what came up in that process was what does it mean to be involved in transdisciplinary partnerships, because a lot of those partnerships people were talking about at the conference were transdisciplinary, however you might define that. And we could get into definitions at some point if we want. But so we set up a process of, we had people who took on the role of being catalysts during the conference. So they followed a theme through the conference and tried to stimulate discussion and conversation in that theme, and also sort of track what was going on so that they could then bring that understanding of the conference that came from that particular pathway through it into a subsequent sense-making process. So we had about, I think it was around 700 participants around the world. There was events in Prague and the US. There was an online conference, but the biggest event was the Sydney one, and it's where we really focused our sense-making. And so how it proceeded after the conference was we brought together the people who'd been the conference catalysts, the chairs of the conference, and we just met multiple times without a really strong goal or sense of research questions to say, what do you think emerged from this conference? What were the takeaways about how to form transformative partnerships? And out of that, it was essentially an ongoing dialogue process and became a writing piece as well. We just did sort of undirected writing process, and each reflected on our experience of the conference, and then started to try and synthesize and integrate what emerged from that. And if we can go to the next slide. This, it'll be a bit small for people to see in the room, but this is what was sort of coming out of our sense-making process. So it's in review at the moment, but what started to emerge, so you can see 3 research questions emerged for us, which were what practices do participants use to navigate the complexity and uncertainty of building and maintaining multi-stakeholder partnerships for system transformation? And then we were interested in what sort of capacities and practices they needed to build and sustain partnerships, and what are the priorities for future research to get better at forming partnerships for transformation. And what started to emerge for us was this staged model, which is over on the left there, of the kind of 6 stages, and they're only loosely sequential. You sort of dip in and out of these stages over time, but the stages that you move through in forming transformative partnerships, and applies really well to transdisciplinary partnerships as well, I think. So stages of preparing and entering a partnership, and what you bring into it with you, what sort of baggage you bring into it in terms of values and experience, but also positive things that you bring in. How do you then start to connect and relate to each other in the partnership, getting to know each other? How do you move to actually trying to come together as a partnership and cohere and integrate in some way so that you've got a shared purpose, you actually become a partnership? And then, because we're interested in transformations, then starting to do the work together of amplifying and transforming to create some sort of change in the world outside the partnership. Then listening and adapting through that process of engaging with external systems to try and transform things. What do we learn? How do we change in our partnership? And then how do we let go of the partnership or renew it, sort of borrowing a metaphor from resilience of the idea of release and renewal at the end of a partnership. So that's, I'll probably leave it there because of time, but yeah, that was one sort of recent experience of transdisciplinary work.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. I'm going to hand over to Ehsan now.
Okay. Okay, so can we have my slide? But the examples I've brought today is kind of like an old one for me. This is a story of this river in central Iran and crossing the city of Isfahan, which was the old capital of Persia. That river is now completely dry. And you can imagine London without Thames, or Cairo without Nile for the people of this city. It's so entangled with the people's identity the values and how they see themselves. And it's a kind of like a national problem inside Iran. How to fix the problem? People have different ideas, but the question was, what was the reason that we have this problem in the first place? And depends on whether that you are in the upstream of this river or downstream, you might have a very different interpretation of what's the problem. And that's why even scientists have a different views of what's the problem. So I'm not going to talk about like, how they see or how they frame the problem, but based on their ways of framing the problem, they come up with their own solution. And because the downstream, usually in the those people working in the water conflict, they know that usually they are more powerful. They are the hegemon, usually in the basin river system. They said, okay, let's go with building the biggest trans-basin water transfer project in the Middle East. So, so what they are doing right now is that to come up with this project to bring all these different stakeholders to actually getting people to accept the solution of water transfer project. And the project that a little bit I want to talk about is that I was working there as a water engineer, water modeler. When I went back to do my PhD, I was not anymore a water modeler. I was had another hat, which was like a social scientist. I really like to understand the politics behind that. Anyway, so the project I was working on was that try to use not model, but a theater to bring these people together from upstream and downstream, get them to talk about this problem, although they have different viewpoints of what is actually the problem. The issue was that they have very negative stereotypes, historical stereotypes against one another, no trust. Scientists didn't talk to one another. I'm not talking about disciplinary scientists, but based on the place. And I did the survey, I found that people in the upstream, they had exactly the opposite view of what is the best or sustainable solution from those people in the downstream. And that was just a scientist. So what I did with explore with this project was that using theater, which I call the pathway theater, to try to bring people here. So, and the green space for me, it was more of how we can open up the discussion, how we can get people to have multiple futures rather than one single future, and that requires having broad input, kaleidoscopic view of the problem. So it's a kind of like a conceptual view of how the theater can help us to get to that place, which I explained the detail of how we run the workshop. But at the end of this, going back to what you point about, your point on transformative and partnership, what I specifically try to look at is the transformative engagement. And how dialogue is so central if we want to get people to come up with something. But I guess you cannot yeah. So I guess it's kind of maybe I will end up here without a dialogue. My experience of having trying to have a transdisciplinary discussion is kind of pointless. It doesn't go anywhere. And from this project, I found that there is an emergent property come out of that, which was building a new network of people working together, which was, I didn't expect that in the first place, that these two stakeholders there's any common ground between them. Anyway.
Great. Thank you, Ehsan. And we'll now move on to Rebecca.
Thanks. I love that you've mentioned dialogue. I'm going to talk about a project that I work on called Navigating Sustainability Transitions, about critical minerals. It's part of CSIRO's Valuing Sustainability Future Science platform. Critical minerals are the materials and minerals that we need for modern technologies. Generally, you'll hear them when we're talking about renewable energy, so wind and solar and electric vehicles. And they're critical minerals because they're really important, but also they have vulnerable supply chains. So Australia has a big push for more mining of critical minerals to support just energy transition. But the word justice is kind of really tricky in this space. What does justice mean? Justice, when we're kind of thinking it through in sustainability science, we're thinking of procedural justice, epistemic justice, distributive justice, recognition justice. They're kind of really difficult words to talk about in a mining space. So we've really adopted the Intergovernmental Panel on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services approach of values recognition. And that's kind of this point at the top is, how are the different ways that we can recognize the diversity of values that might exist in critical mineral systems, and how can we incorporate those different values into decision-making systems at different levels. That's kind of our articulation of the problem, but what does it mean to approach that problem in a transdisciplinary way? My background is a little bit in forestry and natural resource management, where we had seen the success and importance of dialogue in bringing together different stakeholders. Arriving in Australia a year ago to work on this project, I really realized that I'm not trusted as a convener. CSIRO doesn't have the experience in this kind of boundary spanning work in this sector. So jumping into a multi-stakeholder dialogue was not going to be a good step for us. Instead, we've developed, I guess you could say, sectoral specific, sort of stakeholder specific partnerships, small scale projects that we're working on at the same time. We're working with the land councils, the Indigenous representative bodies in Queensland to look at the intersection of First Nations and critical minerals in Queensland. We have some work with the Critical Minerals Association, industry representative body, on building some understanding of what some of the aspirations are for critical minerals companies to achieve outcomes of justice and sustainability. And we have a business company that we're working with who want to try and take on a different way of mine development as a business model, and we're building a theory of change with them. What we're learning is that it's really difficult to work in this space, to deal with hugely contested issues. I'm happy to talk about some of the barriers and opportunities, boundary tools a little bit later on. Probably I can leave it there.
Sure.
Yeah.
All right. Awesome. Thank you. All right. Lots of common themes and ideas coming through. Now we'll move on to our final speaker. I don't even know where to look. Yeah, probably. Thank you. All right. You're good to go, Mohammed.
Okay, good day, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm sorry I'm not there, but Bogor City is a bit too far from Canberra, so please excuse me. Just one slide. Maybe Jasper can help. Put the last slide only, please, Jasper. So I just changed the topic because I found out this morning is already talk about. So please allow me to share a little bit of experience from Sulawesi, Indonesia, to be precise, from a very remote island of the coast of Eastern Sulawesi, or we call it Eastern Peninsula of Central Sulawesi. So myself, my background is in biology, but I'm doing this conservation work for saving endangered species with a number of experts in different disciplines, including geography, forestry, education, and entrepreneurship. So what we are doing, and especially myself, for 3 decades and more already, we are learning together with the indigenous people about the motivation for conservation, because this island, I do not know on the world scale, but this is one of the top endemic species area in Indonesia. Only 2 only 2 islands in Indonesia that has more than 10 endemic species occurred nowhere else in the world. So maybe also world class, probably world class place for wildlife species. that is stewarded by the indigenous people and local communities that we have. So we are doing kind of co-production of knowledge about the nature, about the culture, and about sustainability. So with between science and local knowledge, or we call it indigenous local knowledge, we have seen some progress in doing conservation of species. So very quickly, there is a number of issues about, for instance, the species itself. We also need to learn about the ecology of the rainforest and also the restoration. We are learning that, for instance, it's better that local people plant their own forest trees rather than getting from outside, because ecologically it is better to use the local seeds. So we are also learning about landscape ecology, and of course about local culture and a lot of human dignity, and about local agents of change, who are they and what is their motivation. And of course, when you speak about conservation, you also need to learn if there is sacred places in the forest, which is the case. Also, we learn about safeguarding. For instance, uh, I know some swiftlet cave with a lot of potential for, guano-like, but I told the local community not to tell to the outsiders until they are ready. And of course, we also need alternative livelihood. And of course, we are doing engagement with friendly policy makers, because what is the use of research if we cannot connect it to policy? These are just example of some species. There is one of the smallest primate in the world, and the cute bear. Unfortunately, it is being, it is called fish there because it is a local delicacy, but people are changing. So my concluding and main point is to do transformative learning, multidiscipline. We need to engage, and this called for an approach such as participatory action research. In our case, only through the participatory action research we can learn through the transdisciplinary spheres. And lastly, this is the kind of work that is not 5 years, not 10 years, but more than 30 years. And now I have a young anthropologist who said he will continue for the next 20 years or more. So local anthropologist. So thank you again for the opportunity. That is all my sharing for now. Thank you, Carina.
Thank you very much. Thanks to everybody for those little provocations to start us off. I mean, I think lots of really common themes there about partnerships and dialogue. And yeah, I think that kind of real challenge of bringing together a diversity of perspectives. So I think lots to start with. So we're going to, one of my first questions is about some of the enablers of transdisciplinarity. So literature from science and technology studies talks about things called boundary objects. So these boundary objects are entities. They could be computer models, assessment reports, they could be maps. They're different kinds of concepts that allow disciplines and communities to work together. And so sometimes people have different interpretations of what a boundary object is, but it enables a diverse disciplinary collaboration to work together towards different interests or goals. So my first question is, were there boundary objects present in your collaborations? If so, what were they? How did they function? And yeah, just some examples so that we can kind of give people a sense of what we mean when we talk about boundary objects and their value in transdisciplinary collaboration. I'm open to anybody going first. Mochamad, if you'd like to go first, or anyone else. I think we're going to move to the online meeting platform so we can see everybody's faces. I'm going to keep looking in lots of different directions.
Can I go in first?
Yeah,
Miss
we'd love you to.
Carina? Thank you, because to buy time for our colleagues to sort out things. But for me, if I understand correctly, the boundary object is a shared vision for sustainability that includes an appreciation of indigenous and local knowledge, because without them, I cannot progress. For instance, I discovered some species new to science, and also species that is lost to science for more than 100 years. That is not possible without collaboration with indigenous and local knowledge, and that kind of approach will link with geographers, with foresters, with whomever is interested in sustainability. So for me, it is the boundary object, if I understand correctly. Thank you.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. That's a really, really empowering way to start to think about boundary objects as a future-oriented kind of aspiration to work towards. Any other comments from other panelists?
We had being at the same experience, so everyone had taken a different journey through the conference and had a unique perspective to share. So when we got together to talk about it, they were really rich conversations, because we immediately had a shared experience, but also the different lenses that each person had looked at it through, that meant that we could probe into how other people had experienced the conference, what had been the sessions that you went to that I didn't go to, and how did that contribute to your understanding of what a transformative partnership looks like, and what the participants felt a transformative partnership looks like. And then sort of embedded within that were lots of more specific boundary objects. We had graphic recordings done of various sessions. I've got a slide that shows them, but if it's hard to get that up, we won't worry about it. But you know, we could all look at those different graphic recordings and take something different from the experience, and you know, latch onto a different part of that that image that captured the a particular session. There was a set of postcards to the future that all of the conference participants did, so that became another sort of boundary object that we engaged with.
So my answer was exactly like that. So, so theater, which we practice, became the boundary object. I guess, like, this wasn't something that, when I did that in the first place came to my mind, because at the time I was interested in the boundary object and the notion of boundary object as something that can help me to unpack the politics behind things. So, for example, the quick things that came to my mind back in the day in terms of the boundary object was that how, for example, a report or water model, there was in our case, there was a historical edict, there was a historical water right that goes back to 500 years ago, that one of the sort of group of actors, they carry with them, and they had this legal interpretation of what does that mean for them and their community, and they carried with themselves to our workshop and say, like, this is our way of understanding this. And it was interesting because that specific object or artifact had its own politics behind it, but it was showing that this like assemblage of network and actors sitting together behind that specific artifact. For me as a researcher, that was very interesting to observe how that things was become the central point of conversation. Some people advocate for it, some people resist it. But when I'm looking at it from the transdisciplinary perspective, I guess, like, the whole experience of workshop or theater, in my case, was, I guess, like the boundary object, because we asked them to create the stories about the futures. And through that, so they came to, it was a one-day workshop, 8 in the morning, 6 p.m. It was very full on. And they came to the workshop with their presentations, reports, documents to show that the right is theirs, not the other side. And we asked them, sorry, this is not a workshop. You give a talk or give a presentation. It's more about like you tell your stories. And we use the medium of theater to create those shared stories. And whether that you are a water scientist or a shopkeeper, that we intentionally invite people to to break those silo thinking of expert. And I guess at the end, that particular exercise became a boundary object in a way that it creates a dialogue, as we're saying, it create this, and at the end, you will see the whole notion of engagement, which was I had a specific way of looking at it from before the workshop, became something else because it's people changing, their relationship also is changing. And after that workshop, they got together at the corner of the room, and a few of them, they talked to one another. And after a few months, I found that they established their own NGOs. So I guess you have this transformation at multiple levels, at the personal level, relational level, but also partnership level as well.
I'll make a quick comment on that.
Of course, yeah.
I think I felt the same with the Critical Minerals Association. We've had a bit of a hard time organising an event. We've been working together on it for some time. And that process has been so good for our relationship building. Almost it doesn't matter if the event happens or not, but having to struggle through something together has been really powerful for us too.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, one of the things that I'm hearing when I reflect on this is you all see these boundary objects as the things that are creating shared space. Do people who are interacting with them need to know and understand that they're engaging with a boundary object? We're all kind of wonky academics that are sort of driving these things. Does it matter? I've often thought this in projects where I'm I know that this is the boundary object, but does the conservation biologist or the climate scientist, are they looking at these entities in that way? Or is this just, the shared bit, I think, matters, but does it matter that people know that they're interacting with something that's intentionally shared to create meaning in all these other... Am I making any sense?
I think in a way it's helpful. Maybe it's not the same language, but this is something that we can talk about, we can disagree on, and you sort of make it clear that through that boundary object is maybe a space where you can be contested and challenging each other, rather than perhaps this is a report that we're finalising and we're producing it and it's done. So maybe it's not how you call it, but how you do it or something.
Yeah. Any other reflections? Mochamad, if you have any reflections, just chime in.
I just think that's a really important point, because we would never say, here's the boundary object, but we would be really careful with how we introduce, we're going to be working on this thing, but we're all working it out together. This is not, doesn't have to be this way. Your interpretation, in our case of the conference, is as valid as anyone else's. So it's about that framing that opens up the possibility of interpreting things differently. And we would never say, hey, the conference is a boundary object, or whatever else we might be using.
I think potentially seeding some of the next question, which is really about barriers to prevent these working relationships in transdisciplinary collaborations. I mean, conflict, contested views, tricky issues, sort of that kind of diversity of views and perspectives has come up a little bit. So I'm just interested, beyond those kind of general senses of everybody's different and everyone has different views and problems, and potentially the solutions, were there any really specific barriers that have become problematic to the working relationships in these partnerships?
For me, it's just trust.
Trust.
Yeah. So everything boils down to trust for me, at least in my experience, because it is not as sometimes it's quite confronting. It depends on the topic that you are working on. If it is controversial, if it is at least in the case that I discussed today, it's a national security issue, and you want to make a change because so many people depends on the solution. And you want to again, maybe that's a question around whether that you need transdisciplinary research in the first place or not, because usually it's framed, no, it is an urgent issue. It requires urgent action. and we don't need to consult with people or like bring everyone on board. But if we are saying that no, transdisciplinary is important for transforming the way that we see the problem or engage with one another, I guess trust is very fundamental to make it all happen.
I think for me, it's definitely trust, timing, and language. So trust and timing kind of going hand in hand. We're sort of trying to work with the Department of Resources in Queensland who are developing their critical minerals strategy and enacting it sort of now. And we're saying, well, this is fantastic. What a great opportunity to work together. And they're saying, well, we're not ready. You know, we need to get ourselves organised before we can really develop a partnership with you. And that's a lot because that trust isn't there. But even if it was there, I also wonder from a timing perspective if they would support that. And then the other is language. We were developing a partnership early on with lawyers, and our articulation on a document of what that partnership looked like did not match the way that they wanted to articulate that partnership. And that was a very strong point of contention, and we weren't able to pursue that partnership. So that's something as a researcher, perhaps we are maybe not as careful with words as lawyers might be. And that made apparent.
Your words were opening up a space that was too broad from the legal technical, or can you elaborate on that a little?
So we were attempting to form a space where we could privilege Indigenous voices in this certain problem we were dealing with, and these lawyers had to make sure that they remained independent across the different stakeholders. Right. And so the way that we were trying to make that work, it just didn't fit with the way that they needed to operate.
And so did it just...
So that wasn't continued, yeah.
Yeah, okay, interesting. Chris?
Can I come in?
Oh, yes, Mochamad, yes, please.
Yeah, thank you. So there was a question about boundary object.
Yeah.
In my field experience, it depends on the client. In this case, indigenous people and local communities, because they are the anticipated champion or agents of change. And the boundary in our case, we try to be owned by the client. So we really dig what they think is important. And the barrier, as mentioned before, of course, trust. And the other is the capacities to understand, because in our case, not everybody understand the need for change. And also in some powerful positions or individual, there is rent-seeking behavior. So they are not enthusiastic with change, even if it is for building better capacities, even if it is for sustainability, they don't want that. And finally, the barrier is leveling the playing field. I mean, when we work with the indigenous people and local communities, they are kind of the downtrodden because the state is not with them, if I can say so. But we are also working with legal experts who can help to identify and formulate the rights of the indigenous people. So those four. Thank you, Carina.
Thank you. Yeah.
I would just add that while I think trust is really important, there can be a tension between trust and diversity. So in the process I've been talking about, trust was not difficult. These are all people that were part of the transformations community. They've been to the same conference. They were like-minded, so trust was there. But did we have enough diversity of perspectives in that group? I don't think we did. We tried really, really hard at the conference to make sure that First Nations voices were really prominent in the conference, and they were part of the keynotes and semi-plenaries, and there's a really strong strain of Indigenous thinking throughout the conference, but there were no Indigenous participants in the sense-making that we did afterwards. We couldn't get people to continue their participation in that way, and there's so many demands on you're someone who's seen as representing a particular perspective, like First Nations perspective, there are incredible demands on your time now to be the person that represents that view into these kind of processes. And there's a real risk of burnout. You're constantly in demand to come into my transdisciplinary project and tell us what Indigenous people think. And that's a huge burden to place on people. So we couldn't find those people to continue in the sense-making process, and it's a lot to ask of them. And we don't have good representation from the Global South in that transformations community either. So lots of trust, not enough bridging of different perspectives, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the burnout and participation, I often think in some of the projects that I've been involved with, it's like as academics, we are paid to be there and sit and think. You know, that's our job, and it's a luxury and a privilege. And often the people who we're working with in these transdisciplinary partnerships, I mean, if they're from the government, they're paid, but if they're not from the government, they're often not paid. And so, yeah, what does it mean to be able to sort of level the playing field? How do we kind of engage in transdisciplinary partnerships in ways that can sort of, yeah, just manage that massive inequity just on the starting point of it becomes an arena for people who can afford to participate in them? Anyone? Answer to that very difficult little question. Someone in the room.
Hi, I'm Leonie, and I think it's a great question, and I'd like to just scope it a little bit wider. So in some of the work we do in Southeast Asia, we have to pay for participation.
Yep.
And ethically, it's seen as totally inappropriate. And yet, if you put it in this context, actually all we're doing is levelling the playing field. If we did not pay them to turn up, they have wages that are significantly below us and they would not be able to attend. So at what point are we coming up against the ethics of the research and the structures that we've already established and true diversity and engagement and participation of someone?
You didn't solve the problem though. That's what you said you were going to do, wasn't it?
We're actually going to do something.
Yeah.
We're actually going to create action that enables a diversity of voices to be around the table. And ethically, we find it hard to get it through. So that's what we did.
Yeah.
Who's saying we shouldn't be paying them?
Your ethics process.
Yeah.
Paying
Human ethics.
participants is seen as a very
Compensation okay, but payment not?
Yeah, so we had to word it nicely. Yes, reimbursement. Oh, a whole range of things, but it's more. So, you know, there's a difference between reimbursing their costs and actually paying for participation. And because you're not paying everyone the same amount, because some people are already paid, like us and government people. So that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
I think what's fundamental is thinking about changing funding systems, because often they're very much tailored at universities, at researchers, but if we are able to actually engage in transdisciplinary process, or in order to do that, we also need to fund the non-academics as well. I think there is not happening enough in that regard. So they're often expected without any financial support.
Yeah. I mean, and I also think, you know, funding processes that require the entire thing to be nailed down to a set of objectives and deliverables and Gantt charts, and when it's an evolving, emergent process that people participate in and it changes as it goes, I think funders have a very large role to play in kind of what enables or becomes a problem in these things. I've got some more questions, but we could also open it up to people.
Just have a comment online.
Yeah, comment online.
James, hi. James, did you want to?
Oh, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Oh yeah, thanks, Carina, and everybody. Sorry, just rewinding a little bit back to the issue of trust, and Chris's point. I think that if you're genuinely diverse, then or trying to be diverse, then obviously trust is much harder to achieve. But no, I was just reflecting on the dilemma that you need trust to be able to achieve anything, but trust takes a long time to build, and we don't have time. So that was the sort of the horns of the dilemma I was thinking about. And then coming out of that, I was wondering if you'd reflected already, because I missed the beginning of this session, but on something about the personalities of the people involved, particularly us, if I can say that, because we're the ones that often are driving these processes and using this terminology, whether we like it or not. So what does this say in terms of building trust about how we should behave and our personalities? I'm sure you've all come across people who you dread to see involved in a participatory process, but that's being a bit holier than thou. I'm sure a lot of our behavior is not necessarily ideal either. So I wondered if anyone had considered that in terms of the trust building process.
Thanks, James. I think some really valid points there. Where have you gone, the climate scientists? Did I say that online?
Maybe, I don't think it answers the question, but what it makes me think of is we've been using this word a bit, relational praxis, with Claudia and Carina, and they'll talk about in the next session, but don't get on a call and say, hey, give me the answers to my questions. It's, you know, it's building up, who am I, who are you, where do we sit in this space, and building that relationship. And time is, you know, that can take time, but it can also just take 15 minutes at the start of a call. Like, there are different ways you can think about the time that you invest into relationships that build trust.
Yeah, I mean, on the time thing, I remember at the conference last year, Donnie McClurkin stood up in a semi-plenary and said, was grappling with this issue, and he said when a firefighter gets to a fire, they don't launch straight into tackling the fire immediately. He said they get there and they put their hands in their pockets when they first arrive, so that they can't leap straight into action. And then that lets them take stock of the situation before they decide what's the best thing to do in this space. And he followed it up with talking about the idea that slow is smooth and smooth is fast. And so I don't think there's any alternative to having to build the trust to be able to actually act together, because it's only through acting together that we can achieve transformation. So sometimes that does mean stepping back and going slower than we would like to, given how urgently we all feel these problems. But I don't think there's any other way. And so we just have to get on with building those relationships that we need to create change.
Anyone else on the panel have anything to reflect on that one?
Maybe I just, I mean, I cannot articulate it better, but I guess one thing maybe I want to emphasize here is around the notion of urgency, because there's a problem with the call for action sooner, and the main challenge that I face is that we trust to the people that we turn to the people that we trust, actually. And when we articulate everything around it's too late, we lean toward the structures that created the problem in the first place. And I guess you're right. I guess we should be comfortable with pausing and then acting. And I remember this project that I started, it was back in 2008. It's still like they have the same problem. And 2008, everyone say it's too late. And they make actions and it reinforces it, like you have these reinforcing loops kicking and you have the problem again and again, it backfires. So I guess it's worth to acknowledge that it requires time to build trust. It's hard, it's difficult. Like, you know, if I want to emphasize one thing from transdisciplinary research, it's difficult, as you said. It's so difficult. And I guess like sometimes I don't have that much of experience, but after doing a couple of them, I said, I'm not going to do it again. I'm sorry, but that was my personal experience, because I feel like I'm committed to these people. If I'm not going to deliver this after that, there will be a burnout problem for the advocates of the community who trusted me in the first place. I was there for 6 months, convincing people to come be on board. And then I'm doing a couple of workshops and I go to the next project. And I guess that requires a little bit of like a systematic, more systemic scaffolding around this transdisciplinary research if we are going to build everything more effectively.
Any other comments online or
I just had a question about how you advance not consensus building, but the interpenetration of knowledges through the transdisciplinary process. So beyond bringing them together, where you go from there, and particularly around whether your cases. It's very interesting to hear these lived experiences, whether you're focusing on finding points of connection from which you can then leverage the diversity, flesh that out in more detail, or whether you're pointing to a speculative, future scenario and asking everyone to bring their best to the table. I'm just wondering where you take it once you have brought a diverse group together. How do you progress it from there? Thanks.
You got something? So for our work, I suppose it's that point about finding points of connection. So, whilst we're doing our transdisciplinary projects, we've also doing a bit of background work with some researchers working on similar systems, and we're doing a sort of participatory systems analysis, and we're looking at where these leverage points might exist. And it's interesting because it really does match the reality of when we're having these sort of conversations with our partners where we're able to see them connect. And so perhaps, one of these points might be policy reform to have Indigenous-led impact assessments, where it's an opportunity to bring in those different knowledges through a policy regulatory process. We're not enacting that as a research within our transdisciplinary partnership, but we're hoping to, I guess, open up the range of possible pathways to make progress towards that goal, and for the actors we're working with to make that progress. So perhaps a little more hands-off in that way, but having a bit of a theory of change in mind as we're taking on this work.
I guess for me, again, it depends on the level of trust you have in that practice. Like, if you have the transformation, this transdisciplinary project that you are involving in, engaging people from very different background, very different worldview, would be different if you are like, like in your case, you were saying, for example, saying like in a conference that doesn't have too much of problem people sitting next to one another. Like, in my case, people like, didn't sit next to one another because they didn't like one another. And if that's the case, I guess you can start just with the stories, shared experiences, like, and what makes you to come to this event in the first place. There should be some reason that you travel like, hundreds of kilometers to come to this shared place to talk about something for one day. So, and I guess my experience was that getting people to talk about those lived experiences is very powerful. And through that, yes, those speculative futures, or if you have the way that you can design the workshop that can people can bring their own stories. And from there, they can create a relationship so they can talk to one another. I guess, like, so we are, in my case, I'm talking about something before you start your project. So you are actually, it's an infrastructure for having a transdisciplinary project. So people talk to one another, have a dialogue around a controversial topic. Yeah, so I guess like the story for me, what I found in my project is that people are very good storytellers. Honestly, I didn't know that. Like, when, I know that this time, the next time I was again impressed by how people tell stories, engage one another. People, again, this is something that I reported in my paper, but people come, they say like, no, I'm not going to sit next to this person. They kept threatening me that, I'm leaving. If I don't show this PowerPoint, I'm leaving. But they stay because they want to talk. But if they trust you, if they trust the process, they will stay there. They will talk to you, and they will talk to someone that they don't like to talk. And I guess like the outcome for me that, again, I didn't expect, that something emergent coming out of the whole thing that, again, I didn't expect, the relationship that I didn't know that it's a possibility that can take form. And that would create a transformative engagement, if I want to call it.
Jasper?
Yeah, I had a question that kind of follows on from this about outcomes. And I guess, what do we owe the participants in transdisciplinary processes Because I think it's clear that we know what we owe, like our funders and our own institutions in terms of publications as particular outputs. But like, what do we owe the participants in addition to money, if you want to pay for participation? But also, whose responsibility is it to bring those outcomes about? And I think Ehsan's point about some of those outcomes are actually out of our hands. Yeah. So any reflections around that?
I think we just owe them honesty about what the scope of the process that they're getting involved in is and what we're able to deliver. So if there's a point where our project ends and that's maybe there's no direct link to a policy outcome or an institutional change, or maybe there's an expectation that the community then has to take whatever comes from this endpoint and run with it, you just got to be really clear that that's what we're setting up, and then to actually deliver on that. So if you're creating the expectation coming into this community, we're going to change everything for you, everything's going to be better afterwards, but you can't possibly control that outcome, then you'll break the trust and you'll never be invited back again afterwards.
But I think this gets a little bit to James's point about, it's usually the researchers driving these sorts of things, and sort of some of this I think the starting point in which we come together, like, I think that the most successful transdisciplinary project that I've ever been involved with, I'm looking at Claudia and Riedy, is the Columbia Conservation Futures Project, where we were working with WWF Columbia to look at bringing climate change into protected area management. WWF Columbia had a long-standing partnership with the Protected Area Management Authority in the region. I think one of the things, reflecting on the project, and Claudia, Riedy, disagree with me or agree with me if you will, everyone in the project had a different role, and everyone in the project needed each other to be able to realise their outcomes. So it was a project that was tied into an existing relationship between WWF and parks. They both had their agendas that the project was enabling and was feeding into. I don't think it was particularly transformative. I think that's probably a question that we can kind of come to, because if you're working within existing processes so that there is someone that has ownership over making that change, and that existing process is a policy context, policies contexts are often not particularly transformative. But because someone had ownership beyond the research itself in trying to steer something towards an outcome, and everyone needed each other to be able to deliver on the vision, back to Mochamad's shared vision, I think it was really successful because we couldn't have done it alone. I don't know.
And just a comment on that as well, in relation to the previous part of the discussion. Victoria was speaking at earlier presentations, but the points about trust. One of the interesting things in that project, which ran over several years, was that I guess for me personally, it was only about halfway through that project where some of our partners shared with us that they actually didn't trust each other and hadn't for a long time, and the convenership that the project brought about that put them into a safe space where they could talk together, that's part of that was a really important part of the relationality of the project, that I guess from my perspective, and maybe you were both a bit more across it than I was, because I was like, what, you organisations didn't talk to each other beforehand or didn't get along? Because when we brought them together, we scaffolded it in such a way that they could have those conversations in productive and meaningful ways. That's what happened. And so I think, I'd certainly just assumed that they always got along. And then it was interesting to find out that they did, and that the project itself was instrumental in reforming that trust between the partners, quite independent of the trust they had with us. So that's just another component of that particular project, but I think it's interesting in relation to the trust.
The only thing I can add to that is coming back to James' comment on time.
Yeah.
To building trust, you need time, because it's very hard to engage in the spaces, creating a safe space, let's say, or having these different stories, interests, and ideas of what a project is. You need to create that safe space, but you also need a lot of time to allow these conversations to happen respectfully and meaningfully, and that's what is Usually that's one of the barriers we see in the project. We are just prioritizing the output over the outcome.
And I think Chris's point about honesty, if we're talking about transformational change, it requires risk-taking.
Yeah.
And being honest about being unable to deliver and where your scopes are limited, but kind of maybe a willingness to take on those risks. Something that we're working with.
For the researchers to take the risks or for the partners? Yeah.
Yeah, to kind of say, yeah, I'll take a bit of time out of my busy life to support this work. I hope there's something comes out of it for what I'm trying to achieve.
Yeah.
But maybe it's, you know, the problem itself is not really, it's going to be beyond the scope of what's achievable in the short time frame.
Yeah.
Carina, comment.
Yeah. Yeah, Stephanie. And Mochamad, also, do you have anything to add? We haven't heard from you for a bit.
Yeah, thank you. Just
Hello?
very quickly.
Sorry.
Yes, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Just very quickly, and sorry for going back a little bit, but when we talk about funding, I was thinking about payment in kind. So for instance, when I do work with the indigenous people and local communities, I try to compensate for their time fairly, but no more than that, because it will raise expectations and it will not change their mindset unless there is a kind of payment in kind, meaning that one can compensate knowledge with knowledge plus economic enterprise, so that they can see a better livelihood out of their knowledge. And this is part of building trust that we talk about. Thank you.
And Stephanie?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I just had a comment, which I guess was a reflection from my own processes and reflecting during my research, which is around that understanding the sense of urgency and that feeling to do things quickly, but the need to perhaps stop when that comes on and reflect about what that might say about our own assumptions about whether we think we already have all the answers, so we want to progress fast to just get to the end, and whether we need to actually sort of stop and question our sense of speed and how other people might look at that need for speed, for doing things fast or not, or the need to slow down. And I think perhaps if we can reflect on that, we might make a bit more space and time for those relationships to build.
Should I pose another question?
What's your answer to that?
What?
Because we were talking about the agile governance, right? Like
governance.
Like the other day, we were talking about agile governance and then the notion of speed. So
yeah. I mean, I just think Chris's answer kind of gets to that. And I mean, I think we can all think of processes where people have tried to move too fast and there's been backlash and it's moved even slower than it would have had it kind of moved at a pace of inclusion. I think one of the things that maybe just also riffing off what Claudia said, you know, in the project, that the case studies of co-production project that we did, that was led by my former postdoc Josie Chambers, I mean, I think it was really interesting in that how much gatekeeping was done to create the safe space. So we often talk about the need to be inclusive and bring everybody in, and that's kind of the normative aspiration, is to engage everybody. But actually the number of the projects, this was case studies, how many were there? It was 30 case, yeah, around 30 case studies of co-production projects, transdisciplinary projects from around the world. And this theme of gatekeeping and safekeeping to enable that. So I know that it's not exactly the time thing, but I think it gets, I don't know, they're all like, there's so many Venn diagrams going on here. My brain's exploding. Like, yeah, I don't know. I think we can get stuck in the, like what Stephanie said, the urgency being so overwhelming when really like all we can do is move forwards productively together. And if we get slammed by urgency and want to move really fast, we get burnt out and we don't do anything good anyway. And we stumble over everybody and make mistakes, and like maybe the planet's still going to burn, but I don't know. I mean, the planet's maybe still going to burn anyway. Like,
yeah, I just had a quick question that I was in my mind asked also reading Ehsan, your article title where you mentioned the term improvisation. And I was wondering, also thinking about talking about urgency and maybe expecting what kind of outcome or hope to achieve. What was for you, and maybe for the others as well, the role of improvisation in designing or thinking about those deliberation processes? Because sometimes it's harder to just let go. And I don't know, it's probably you must have been a deliberate choice to include improvisation in your title, so I can assume it was an important part of your research.
Yeah. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with the interactive theater. That there are different genre of that, but the one that I developed for this case was based on how this theater, you have spectators, like actors and spectators, and how these people who are sitting here, they can replace the actor. And once they replace the actor, they have to improvise the scene in a different way. That's why we call it like pathways. Like they can change it and direct it to a very different way, different future. But they have to improvise. And I guess like in our work, what was interesting is that depends, of course, we knew that, like, if someone from upstream take the lead there, they would take it to the future that benefits the upstream and the other way downstream. But what we did here is that we created this focus group of participants and asking them, it was a mixed group. So half upstream, half downstream, and they have conflict inside their group as they started to create these scenarios that they have to all play. So I describe it very in detail in the paper, but like the whole idea of the improvisation is that whether that they as a group of 4 or 5 can come up with a scenario or a story that they can put part of their own stories into that specific scenario or that specific thing that they want to perform as a group. And they're happy to perform. And I guess the whole point of improvisation is that they have like half an hour or 1 hour to improvise a scenario, improvise a story, that they agree that they want to be part of it. So at least in my case, it's less about the content of what is this improvisation. It's more about getting them to talk to one another, agreeing that this could be something about the future, or this could be a scene describing our present. And I guess like my observation in the workshop was that a couple of groups, they said, we cannot agree on the story. And I said, sorry, this is the plan. You have to stick with that. And except one group, the rest of them, they come up with something. And the improvisation was more about like, how they can collectively agree on some part of the river basin that they can see themselves and their community benefits from its future development, or at least tell the story that they're concerned about.
What else on the panel?
When I hear improvisation, I don't so much think of theatre, but muddling through as a researcher and seeking, not planning, and kind of taking that approach to asking questions. And I think you spoke earlier about having the scaffolding or the architecture that could possibly allow those partners to improvise and muddle their way through. You know, I very much think in transformational change, it is not about picking out where you want to be and making your way there. It's about opening up the range of pathways to pursue those objectives, and maybe that scaffolding, whatever that looks like, can allow for that improvisation.
So can I just pick on that? Because in the work that I was working was mostly around the conflict resolution, as people in the conflict study talk about, let's resolve this conflict. And I didn't like it, honestly, because anyone who's involved in this type of conflict, they know that you should talk about conflict transformation. It's more about transforming the relationship between the stakeholders, and you don't have, whether good for good or bad, you don't have any control over the outcome. You have to just create a space for people to talk and have a genuine dialogue, so they will come up with something. And the problem with the conflict resolution is that usually you have a very clear steps that where you want to go. Which is, I guess, that from my point of view, is very different if you set up the whole system for transformation, that you are easy with the chaos but you scaffolded for that. You are happy with the uncertainty in the dialogue, but you are scaffolding for that.
I would just add that in the sense making that came out of the conference, one of the capacities we talk about a lot is humility, and so being willing to admit that you don't know and being open to letting the process unfold and not sort of jumping in with the idea that you know best about how to bring this to a head, how to resolve it. Because it goes a bit back to the question you asked earlier about the how knowledge has come together in these processes. There's always a temptation, if you've got a timeline and everything, to jump in and say, well, here's the synthesis, and one person does that rather than allowing lots of time for things to actually emerge. And then that, there's all sorts of micro-politics in that. It's quite fraught of everyone shared their knowledge perspectives, but then one person sort of proposed how that all comes together, and everyone's like, yeah, okay, because you've got to get to a resolution. So, yeah, sitting with that uncertainty that you were talking about, and it's really uncomfortable. It's really hard to do, but I think it's really important to learn.
I'm going to jump off that for one of the questions that we had already down here, because I think it's sort of good entry into it. So pluralism is often promoted as a normative goal of transdisciplinary research at the moment, whereas I would say maybe, a decade or more ago, we were talking about integration and interdisciplinary research. We brought everyone together and we smashed them into one conceptual framework. Now we're trying to hold all these knowledges and ways of being and seeing the world sort of together. Can you think of good examples of pluralism in practice? And what is it that you would say has made that good? Or conversely, what are some of the challenges that you've faced in adopting a pluralistic approach in practice? And Mochamad, if you have anything to add, please chime in.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, so the question is about pluralism. Can you think of any good examples of pluralism in practice? Or what are some of the challenges that you faced in adopting a pluralistic approach?
I cannot think about the challenge straight from the top of my head, but of course there is a lot of a lot of coming together between science and indigenous local people when we indigenous local knowledge when we speak about sustainability, and also citizen science. So I can see mainly only through those benefit for pluralism. Thank you.
Thank you.
I found this question quite hard because I guess I see pluralism, it exists. We don't create it, it exists. We all have different values. We're working with multiple stakeholders that have different knowledges and values and worldviews. So for me, when I'm thinking through that, what do you do with that? And how do you navigate the times when there they're in conflict and cannot be sort of aligned, I suppose. I don't have an answer to that question, but I do think perhaps it is about how can you align. I mean, this work that I'm doing is really about values. Where are the spaces where those values align, and how can that help to achieve those shared goals? So I think in a way it is still going to be, there's going to be some integration there, building a common vision, building your shared goals, and then how you navigate that pluralism from there. Have you given it some thought?
I also found the question really difficult, and I don't think I've been involved in a transdisciplinary project that I would call generally pluralistic. I think there's been a lot of the gatekeeping that you talked about, and a lot of we're bringing together the group that we trust and the group that wants transformation, not bringing in the people that don't want transformation. And how do we build bridges between those different communities in a society that seems increasingly polarized? I think there's wonderful examples of deliberative democracy processes and citizen juries that do a pretty good job of that. And there's still, I guess, a certain kind of person who's inclined to participate in those sort of processes and is reached by the invitation, even if the invitation goes out randomly to participate in a citizen jury. But you still get much more pluralistic groups in the citizen jury randomly selected deliberative process than you do in our normal decision making. So I think, the examples of citizen assemblies in Ireland and the UK and other places that genuinely give a really broad range of citizens a voice in decision making are a great example to turn to. But even they could go further. And then how do they start to engage with the stakeholder interests that might not be invited into that process in the same way? So yeah, I think we've got a lot of work to do in this space.
Oh, I have the same issue with the question, because I cannot come up with one single example, but reflecting on my own case study, I guess, if you can create a space for contested narratives be present in the room, I guess for me, you have done maybe the very first step towards transdisciplinary research, and it's not that difficult, honestly. Again, if you move to I'll give you an example. In 2014, I went to Downstream for a conference, international conference on water resource system in Isfahan, and I went there. It was all the best professors from UK, US, Australia. They were in the room. Not a single person from upstream. Okay. So they paid people in business class to come to the event to talk about the science of water, doing participatory work. But they didn't invite one single person from 100 kilometers away. And the title of the conference, it was an international conference, was Integrated Water Resource System in the Alexander River Basin. And I guess the very first question I asked was why you are not inviting someone, and the quick answer was that they are here, they have their own opinion, and you can easily see that they don't want to hear that opposite narrative to be heard in that conference. A few months later, I was invited to another conference in the upstream. The same story. I was there, they don't have money. So they didn't invite someone from international, overseas, everyone internationally. Again, not a single person from Downstream. And they treat the conference as a political campaign. So someone giving a lecture, giving a talk, and after that, everyone just standing and just clapping. It feels like someone is claiming that so you are advocating for us. Your paper is defending us. So what I'm trying to say here is that the transdisciplinary research, especially in the contested issues, If you are working on that, I guess the very first step is that to make sure that those contested narratives are part of that discussion. But again, it's very hard. It's very difficult. I guess that's the whole. Make it difficult. Actually.
Okay, so in the interest of time, because we've only got about 5 minutes left, I'm going to jump to the final question and just ask each of the panelists to just give a short reflection, because it's a sort of forward-looking question. What do you see as a desirable future for transdisciplinary research for transformative change in a time of polycrisis? So lots of jargon there. I mean, what's an optimistic future for this topic? Given, the urgency, the complexity, the challenges that we've all discussed, what would you see as an optimistic future? And Mochamad, do you mind if I throw to you first?
Okay, thank you. So I would like to respond into lines of answer. The first, and they are related. The first is to deal with the polycrisis and realize transdisciplinary approach. I understand we need to invest in really long time. So not just short-term research, but it requires more than a decade. And can I say something related regarding change, or is there a final round of question later?
No, this is your final go.
Okay. So my final go is this. When talking about change from my experience specific to remote indigenous people and local communities with almost non-existent education facilities, it took me 10 years to have an impact on the community. But at least 10 years, it's enough to give rise to sustainability champions on the part of the community. And therefore, it is really worth the 10 years. I'm now in my 32 years, so I'm now 62. So 10 years, good. 30 years, maybe better. And also regarding the change, we also use combined model or kind of blending our approaches. For instance, as a conservation biologist, my main motivation is kind of conservation area. But of course, the IPLC, Indigenous People Local Communities, have their own wisdom. So I work with them so that they have their own community conservation areas. And again, in these 32 years, I've seen people who really championing the cause for their own protected area, because they understand it relates not only to their sustainability, but also to their dignity. And this is my final take regarding trust. Regarding trust, require clearly faith that together you want to change for the better. So like Rebecca said, we need to have a clear theory of change and communicate it. And finally, respect their knowledge and values, and they will probably respect you and wanting to help. And I have proof that IPLC knowledge has been very helpful in doing research of new undescribed or even lost species to science. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Ehsan?
I'm not sure if I have a good answer for that, but I guess maybe I would highlight something around crisis and transdisciplinarity. I don't think I'm a big fan of frame, because like the problem with the crisis is that create a frame that it's usually dehumanize that thing, or create politics around that thing to be treated as a technical problem. And I guess, like, as an engineer, I know that, it's easy for us to come in and say, it's a crisis time. Let's give you a solution. And I guess, like, we already have the solution in our pocket. So whether it's in a climate, whether it's in water, whether it is in AI, whatever, like, we name different things that we want to govern. We usually, I guess, the problem with the framing around crisis is that there is a risk. And the risk is that I'm not sure if it enables transdisciplinary or transformative engagement.
When I think of transdisciplinary sustainability science, I think we've made huge strides in these kind of place-based or landscape scale challenges and maybe how to navigate our way through them. As I'm working on critical minerals in a sort of a national or a regional level, I see a lot of challenges in how transdisciplinary research can enable these, I guess, multi-scale learning mechanisms that really need to happen to level the playing field, or not even level it, but bring to light the challenges and power asymmetries that exist. Some examples that I'm looking at are the renewable energy sector and the First Nations Clean Energy Network in Australia, and also a lot of what's been happening in Canada in the mining space of what can you do to enable that learning and connect it across these different sectors that we need to facilitate change.
I guess we've talked a lot about how hard transdisciplinary research is, but I guess my optimistic vision of a future for transdisciplinary research is that we work as researchers to build long-term relationships with communities, place-based communities, sector-based communities, where those communities then define the research challenges, and we seek funding together to bring about the kind of transformations that those communities are seeking. So less about us winning funding and then imposing what we're looking for, and much more about understanding what those communities see as the transformation that they want to pursue and supporting them to pursue it.
Awesome. All right, I think we're on time. So thank you, everybody. This has been a really inspiring discussion. I've got lots of words. I think some of the ones that jump out to me at the end is dignity, humility, respect, reflexivity. I think those long-term relationships and enduring partnerships is really kind of the thing that gets me out of bed. So aside from coffee, thanks everybody for your time, and thanks for our fabulous panelists. It's been a really great session.
Thank you, Carina, and everybody.
Thanks so much, Mohammed.
Thanks, Mohammed.
Participants online. Thank you to Carina too. We now have a short break, and we'll resume at 3:30 here as before. For online participants, we'll be joined by the new link for the session on speculative futures. And just one final thing on transdisciplinarity, I put it in the chat as well, but our system governance project's been doing quite a bit in recent times on thinking about sort of transdisciplinarity, interdisciplinarity and transformations. We have a new agenda on this issue that's going to be launched midway through the forum on Wednesday this week. So please join that session if you like. We're also pleased that we'll be co-hosting a conference for the transformations community next year. So transformations and ESG community and conference in South Africa. So call for abstracts is out for that. So if you are keen to join, we'll also be hybrid too, but it would be great if you could be involved. All right, thanks so much.